On rare occasions, voters have the opportunity to elect a new district court judge. That is the case for thousands of northern Minnesotans after 6th District Judge Dale Harris announced he'll retire at the end of his term. After yesterday's primary, the field is down to 2 candidates who advance to face each other in the upcoming general election. Northern News Now's Michaela Wrench spoke with one of the candidates and shares why he thinks he's the man for the job.
5 candidates went into Tuesday's primary with hopes of advancing to the general election to become a judge for the 6th Judicial District, but only 2 now continue their journey.
I'm proud to be the one that came out on top in that race.
Gunnar Johnson received the highest number of votes and says his plan going into November is to be a hardworking and effective member of the 6th Judicial District team and will move forward without an agenda.
I think that bringing my experience and knowledge to our local bench and helping people in our community to resolve legal matters is something that I would really like to serve as your judge.
He's a longtime former Duluth city attorney who resigned in 2020 after being placed on administrative leave for how he managed the office. While he didn't want to talk about that now, at the time he felt the findings were inconclusive and stood by his work. The 6th Judicial District is a large one, covering St. Louis, Carlton, Cook, and Lake counties. The region is familiar territory for Johnson. He believes the 3 decades under his belt of practicing law, including serving as the attorney for Hermantown and numerous other governmental organizations, his qualities will give the communities in the 6th District the judge they need.
The primary work I did was on the Iron Range, trying to help develop industry up there, and it was a fun 7 years.
But he hopes the fun will continue as he heads to the general election in November.
This is probably going to be the last job of my career, and I would like to finish my career in a position of public service.
In Duluth, Michaela Wrench, Northern News Now.
A less than 350 votes separated Johnson and second-place finisher Sean Reed. Now, we did reach out to Reed for an interview and have not heard back. We do hope to share his goals with you ahead of the election.